So I think the main question has to be, what do you want from your podcast? It is a thing. What do you want out of it? Hey, everybody. Welcome to Just Start the Podcast. And I'm your host, Andre from A1 Podcasting and Content Creation. And today I have a question for you. Is your podcast a hobby, or is it the next step in your career? Here's what I mean. There are, I would say, thousands. I could say millions, but I'm going to go with the safe bet of hundreds of thousands of podcasters. And a good portion of those podcasters podcast for fun. It's good, clean fun. They wake up, go to their day job on the weekends. They, crack open their computer, do a podcast, send it out. And it's nothing but them getting their ideas out, which is perfectly fine. I think in essence, that's what podcasts were when they first came out. But then there's also, I don't know why I look around like that. But then there's also people who want it to be the next step in their careers. I being one of them. But I have a different twist on mine. So, I really just want to bring, and I don't want to make this about me. I want to make this about you, the listener, the person who wants to get better at podcasting and content creation and learn some tips and tricks. But I'll bring it to me because I can only pull from my experience. What I would like to do is make this one arm of the next step of my career. So in my quest to open a studio and, have classes being taught and just overall nurture that creativity in other people, this is a big hand of that, because why do one without the other? Okay, so to me, I take this a little bit more seriously than me just doing a podcast and sending it out and then, hey, if people listen, people listen, if people don't, if people don't. No, I really want to get this information into some other people's hands. And then you have the coaches, which I've talked about in previous episodes. You have the coaches who also do podcasts to bolster their coaching business, or entrepreneurs who want to bolster their coaching business. And I think that has a place in podcasting as well. Then you also have the people who do podcasts who are celebrities who make that another arm in their career via Joe Budden, via Cameron. I'm trying to think of some some non-hip hop artists that did the same thing. I think Amy Schumer had a podcast at one point in time. Michelle Obama had a podcast. It can lengthen your career and allow you to take on a full-on another life within your career. So there's a lot of people who do that as well. So that was a long-winded way of kind of explaining the differences between the two. So I think the main question has to be, what do you want from your podcast? What do you want from it? Okay, it is a thing. What do you want out of it? If you only want to just talk and run your mouth about something that you like, you have a Game of Thrones podcast, there's nothing wrong with that. But here's where things get interesting. With that Game of Thrones podcast, there might be millions of people who listen to that because there is nobody else making a Game of Thrones podcast at one point in time, because that was early on. There's a podcast that I started liking, and it actually became so popular that when it's called Apartment 4D, and it was the New Girl. New Girl is one of my favorite shows with Zooey Deschanel and all my guys on that show, right? And Apartment 4D came out, and it was just people who've never watched the show before. Well, one guy who never watched the show before, and a couple of girls who loved the show, and they just talked about each episode. It got so popular that Zooey Deschanel and Lamorne Winston went to go make their own show, and they could that was one of the names that they came up with, and they couldn't use it because the other show had it. So the people who are on the show went to make a podcast, but the people who made the podcast about the show already did it, and it was more popular than theirs. Okay, which can go many ways, because over time, what are you really going to talk about once you run out of material? So it has a shelf life. But the point being is that you could take it from one to the other. Doesn't have to stay in one place. Sometimes it might go from a serious podcast down to a hobby. I'm going to let you know something. From me. I have a podcast outside of this one that is obviously a lot more loose, a lot more fun. And there's some cursing and there's some man talk. And over time, as I was trying to make it more of a career and push it forward, I had to step back from it and say, you know what? I don't know if this has the legs to go that far. So maybe we should just do this for fun. That's a choice that you might have to make, and there is a difference. I'll give you a couple reasons why keeping your podcast a hobby might be great for you. It costs money. All of these things cost money, and it's a gigantic learning curve, even when you study all the information. It's a gigantic learning curve. So right now I'm podcasting on a MacBook. I knew I was going to be editing and doing a lot of stuff like that. So I actually went and grabbed a pretty expensive MacBook that I knew could handle the workload. It's about $1,700. Let's see, my DSLR, my Canon camera, which we bought as a group, that cost about $700. You got lights, man, you can get lights from Amazon. It's not a big deal. That's $35 a piece. We already went over that. And then you got from what I'm podcasting with, because my podcast up north actually has the Rodecaster Pro, which was $600. But I have a mobile mic preamp to power my microphone and to plug into my computer. And you can get that for like 200 and something bucks. It's really not that much. And then the mic is $100 also. So it starts to add up to do this at least at a moderate level. And then once I started doing it and I wanted it to look better, and it started bothering me when it didn't look good, is I bought a course. At, I believe it's digitalcreator.com. And it walked me through how to properly set the camera. That camera used to look like garbage. And then once I learned how to properly mess with the settings and get everything the way it should be, oh my gosh, now I'm starting to look pretty good. And as I said on the last podcast, now I'm using an iPhone for a camera. And I got it to look pretty good. So a lot of things you do comes with trial and error. And if you don't have the patience, you might just want to turn your phone on, not care about what you really say, and just get your thoughts out, turn it into a podcast and call it a day. That's when it should be a hobby. But if you care about all the bells and whistles and you want it to look good, feel good, you want to get better every time, you want to reach people with your message, you actually have something to offer the world, I would say consider it to be a part of your career ascension. Consider it to be a part of your career ascension. Perfect example is Matt Barnes and Stack with their podcast. They were NBA players. And if you look when they started, Up in Smoke is the podcast, by the way. All the Smoke, it's one of those. And they took their podcast from something they did with the people that they knew from the NBA, and they got great stories and all. They're on Showtime now. And it's a full-on crew that makes their podcast look amazing. It's like a talk show. So they took it from one point to the next, and now it's the next part of their career. So something is to be said for that. Okay. Then that's not to say they don't have other things in their career that they do. But the podcast was the catalyst to their career ascension after basketball. So that's what I mean. It's like you can do this professionally. It's like it's not a lot of people that can be Joe Rogan. It's not a lot of people that can do that standalone podcast and just be amazing so that everyone follows what they do. It's like, listen, it's not a lot of room for those people. And it's not a lot of people who are that good and can get that good a guest list to be that particular type of podcast. So you have to manage your expectations. So what I suggest is if you want this to be part of your career ascension, then you make that podcast a part of what you do for a living. Okay? If you are a realtor and your goal is to open your own shop, okay, like a Josh Altman, your goal is to open your own shop and you have a YouTube channel, you have all of this media that basically, is your brand. It's your personal brand that you're bolstering. Starting a podcast is great in that particular vibe. Number one, you can invest the money because it's a part of your career. You can actually write it off. So you can invest the money in what you're doing, maybe even bring in a crew to help you edit and do all the things you need to do to make it look squeaky clean. And it's like built-in promotion. So yes, the podcast is fun to do, but really it's to help your personal brand and for your business to grow. So there's other ways to plug in these podcasts to make, and we'll go over those ways in other episodes. I got to keep you around somehow. There's other ways to plug your podcast in and make it part of what you do. So many people will start it as a hobby and say, hey, which I was one of those people. Hey, we should talk about sex. We should talk about how many girls we've had sex with and what positions we like and just man stuff. That'll be great. There's not an audience for that. Let me be the first to tell you, podcaster, there's not an audience for that. So that's where we're sticking in the hobbies. Like, I'm going to tie it all back up. There's not an audience to hear about what you personally like to do. Okay? The only way, and this is from my research, and if you prove me wrong, please put it in the comments. I would love to hear how I'm wrong, and I would love to hear a retort to that stance so I can learn something. I have no problem with that. The only way someone is going to care is, number one, if you're a pretty girl with a social media presence, sorry, or a handsome man with a social media presence already, or you are some type of celebrity, which I believe those two at this point go hand in hand. If you already have some type of social media presence or some career path that was already in the entertainment industry, that's the only way that you can get a podcast off about your sexual exploits, unless you're just really good at podcasting about your sex life. Unless you're just really good. But at that point, it still takes to promote in order for you to get to the masses, for them to see how good you are. So it's like, and I swear, I know guys, I will write all of this stuff down and go bullet point by bullet point. If you want more winnowed down information, you can go to my social media pages, A1 Podcasting and Content Creation, Andre Campbell, and I'll literally break it down bullet point by bullet point. I post every day, so you're always going to get something from me. But when it comes down to you wanting to be that, that salacious podcaster, you want to be like Angela Yee, you want to be like, the girls, I forget their names. I'm so sorry. But the girls who talk about their sex life, you got to have some type of bones in this. But you got to have bones, or you got to have a great network to be able to work your stuff. Or a great angle. If you get good guests, if you get ex-porn stars, or you get ex-sex workers, like you make it interesting somehow and then you package it, you can do it, but it's less than likely. I've tried. You can do it, but you got to have a fresh view on it. And I'll break that down another time to where we can really discuss how you can make that work. Because I don't want to just tell you what you can't do. I want to show you how you can do things or give you ideas to make you inspired to try it. So I do think that it's important for people to know when they're just starting, hey, it doesn't just work like that. You don't just turn a camera on, turn a mic on, all of a sudden everybody cares what you have to say. The truth is, no one cares. You have to make them care. How do you make them care? You find the right audience for your information. And the more zeroed in you are on that information and who you want to help, the better you can find that audience. And then they care. Right now, we are in the month of November. And I just started this podcast. At this point, no one cares about what I'm talking about. That will change. Mark my words. And if you're listening to this when this inevitably, gets 500,000 to 1 million views, let's say 100,000 views, let's say 10,000 views, put down in the comments first or second or third that you're listening to this and you're getting some value from it early or late. So I'm finding my audience right now. So you're seeing it. This is another benefit of me starting this podcast is you're seeing it from the ground up. This is a brand new podcast with a person who isn't very known, started a company and wants to build off of helping people in this industry. So you're seeing it from the start. Hopefully we go really, really far and you'll be able to come back and point out this video to me like, remember when you started? Man, you're doing great now. Can we work together? And I'll say yes. But yeah, so you got to know the difference to where you got a hobby or you're doing this as an extension of your career. I want to find another example for you for an extension of your career. So I come from the hip hop world. Okay, I'm, young guy, was always into hip hop. So I always look for the rapper who starts a podcast and I use that as my examples. But I do believe that CEOs at this point starting podcasts are great. So listen. If you haven't heard anything I said, hear this. Podcasting should be used to build a personal brand. You should be concerned about building a personal brand. The reason being, even if you're a CEO, no matter what level you are, if you build that personal brand with people that trust your personal brand, they will come listen to your podcast, honestly, no matter what you're talking about, because you've built that connection. So that's really what the career side is for. The hobby side, yeah, that's okay. But the career side, you should concentrate on building your personal brand. And then that will help you with your podcast. And they both go hand in hand. So from CEO all the way down to the janitor, if you build a personal brand and you have your podcast, they go hand in hand. That's how you get out of whatever situation you're in, or at least spread the word, which is you. Okay? This might be a short one just because I decided to jump on here, give you a pie. It was on my mind. More detailed podcast, definitely coming in the future. But I really wanted to go over hobby and a career extension podcast. So let me tell you where all this comes from. I ain't gonna let you go yet. Let's see where we at. Let me tell you where all this comes from. So many people ask me about how to start a podcast and what to do next and what they should be talking about. And a lot of people have hobby ideas and they don't realize it. So that's why I thought that this was an important episode, because you have hobby ideas and you don't even realize that you have hobby ideas. So you come to me and you tell me, oh, well, let's talk about how schools are bad. Or, let's talk about how men's health is this and that. Well, let's talk about how fathers should be there in your life. And it's like, Okay, that's all good, but what is your podcast about? We can talk about everything. And it's like, it doesn't go that way. It doesn't go like that. You have to have a plan to start. And I'll reveal that plan in the future and really start to get you guys some real hard, like, a real hard list of what you should do to build your podcast into something that people can connect to. But that's really why I came up with this episode here, is because you don't realize what you're doing and then you go build it. And then years later, you have to basically redo everything because, oh crap, we didn't properly niche down and we're talking about everything. And this is a hobby, but we're putting in money, and I don't want this to be a hobby. I want to do this as a career. So how can I tie it in? So if you want to know how to do that, listen to this podcast. Even though I was jumping around a little bit, there are some jewels in there that if you listen and listen more than once, you'll catch them. You could take notes, or you could just listen if you enjoy it and create your own podcast that can do, numbers, do crazy numbers. Alrighty. So if you got anything from this, let me know in the comments. If you didn't get anything from this, let me know in the comments. Let me know what I can do better, because I will get better as time goes on. Alrighty. So that was another episode of Just Start the Podcast, and I'll catch you next time.